Hello lovely people, I'm Catherine and welcome to the first May video for the coverlet of Comfort. I am handheld because my coverlet of Comfort is quite big. I've joined my friendship stars on to what is in fact the bottom of my coverlet of Comfort. You're looking at it sideways. Now for May the theme is Fantastic Fauna, which means basically any living thing on the planet that is not human or plant. So that could be animals, birds, fish, insects, crustaceans, whatever you like. And because my coverlet is very much centred on myself, I've chosen two animals to put into my coverlet. And I don't think you'll be very surprised to learn that those two animals are Stella and Fred, or a representation of them. So I'll get into that in more detail in a bit, how I'm going to do that. But first of all, what I wanted to show you and why I'm handheld is where I'm going to attach them. Because now we're getting quite large. Excuse me a minute, I'm going to back up, there'll be a scrapey chair noise. Sorry about that. I want to join mine. There's one of mine going by. I want to join mine along this long edge where I'm pointing, which is the final edge which will surround my centre square. Now, I don't want to have a great big long piece like that for May. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make two squares, one for Stella and one for Fred, that will eventually end up at each end of a long strip. And then next month, June, I will make a centre panel. So I'm going to make my two squares of Stella and Fred, and then I'm not going to attach them. Next month I'll make my June panel, which will form a centre, and then so you'll have a long panel which will be Stella, whatever's happening in June, not going to tell you yet, Fred. And then once that's joined into a strip, then I'll attach it to the coverlet. I hope that's clear. And as we go along through the rest of the year, we'll be doing that more often, because otherwise you'll be joining great big long strips. Now mine, I've just measured it, measures 35 inches, just the fancy stuff, not the backing. So I've decided to do a 10-inch square of Stella and a 10-inch square of Fred, and then my centerpiece will be 15 inches by 10 inches. And, you know, like I say, we don't worry about that now, we'll worry about that next month. But I needed to point out my thought process to you, because obviously your coverlet will measure something different. Some of you I know are doing all squares the same size, so you can maybe choose to just do one square if you want, or whatever. But I'm going to do two squares, and planning ahead to have a centerpiece to fit them along the side of my coverlet. So I'm going to stop wobbling about and showing you the whole thing now. Hopefully that's clear enough. Oh, one more thing. Where I've joined it, I want to do some stitching over the join a little bit. I will do that a week on Friday in the next Slowstitch Friday video. And at the same time, I want to talk about why I stitch what where, if that makes sense, or how I respond to the cloth that I'm stitching on. So I'll use the coverlet of Comfort as an example, but hopefully there will be tips for, you know, people, for any of you stitching on anything at all. So I won't do any stitching now on that. I'll save that until a week Friday. So right, so I'm gonna, my arms are now aching. I'm gonna put you up in the stand and sit down and tell you how I'm going to put Stella and Fred into my coverlet. Okay, so my two panels, my Stella and Fred panels, I'm going to take inspiration from the tradition of Kantha embroidery, and I shared this book with you last year when we looked at Kantha in the weekly Slowstitch. In fact, we did 2 weeks on it if you were here last year. 1 week was learning some of the stitches, because it's far more than just the running stitch, and the next week was actually stitching a motif. So I'll link to those two videos below. I don't know how many stitches I'm going to use, how many different stitches. The other thing is I also made an elephant rice bag last year for my friend. I think it was 2 consecutive Wonky Wednesdays if you weren't here or you didn't see that. And there I embroidered elephants on the 4 panels of a rice bag, and I used some shisha mirrors and mostly chain stitch and other Kantha stitches. So I'll link to that as well if you haven't seen it or you don't remember or you want to go back and see it again. But for Stella and Fred, I'm not going to do a dog and a cat. I want to be a little bit more symbolic than that. So I'm going to represent Fred as a tiger, unsurprisingly. He is white with some tabby on him. And I'm going to represent Stella. Now I did think, logic would say represent her as a wolf, but I don't really think of her as a wolf. She's not very wolf-like. I mean, she has wolf in her DNA, of course, as all dogs do, but I think of her more as a bear, because she's got, we call her legs teddy bear legs, because her legs are quite straight up and down, especially when she's very furry, and she's cuddly like a teddy bear. Yeah, so I'm going to do a tiger and a bear, basically. So what I've done is I've looked on the internet for some pictures to inspire me, and I've looked at some traditional Kantha. You know, if you don't want to do Kantha, you could just do straightforward embroidery of whatever kind you like, you know, if Kantha doesn't speak to you. But I've drawn 2 images myself. Before I get into that, actually, let me just say why I want to do fantastic fauna. Well, you know, we share the planet with many millions of species of living things, and as this is about myself, I've always loved animals, many different kinds of animals, but you know, especially as a lot of little girls did, dogs and horses back in the day. And now I live alone, except I have Stella and Fred. They are my housemates. They are my live-in family, if you will. And I know that many of you as well have, I think over the pond you call them fur babies, pets that you love. And I thought, those of you who don't have pets, I'm sure you've either got a childhood pet, or there's just an animal that you like, or maybe if you're that way inclined, you may have a spirit animal or a totem that you identify with, or maybe a loved one had a favourite animal, or maybe something from a childhood book, like, you know, Winnie the Pooh would, I'm thinking about bears, would be an obvious example. So I'm very hopeful that you can all come up with an animal or two. And I've talked only about mammals there, but like I said, if birds or fish or any other, you know, Deloid rotifers, that's a microscopic marine little tiny creature that you can't even see with the naked eye. I was being a bit facetious. By the way, on the subject of Deloid rotifers, I did a piece about them in my my last big series that I did when I was working by machine, because they are they're only female. They reproduce by a process called parthenogenesis. So they produce eggs ready fertilised, no need for men. So anyway, look them up if you're interested, if you're not a marine biologist. Well, they're not only marine, but they do live in water, I believe. Deloid rotifers. I also thought Deloid rotifer would be a great name for a girl punk band back in the day. Anyway, I digress. I'd be fascinated to see anybody who chose Deloid rotifer as their animal. They are an animal. You know, if you think of the 2 big kingdoms of living things, we have animals and we have plants. So we're looking at animals. And you have, if you want to do extinct animals, you know, if you dinosaurs or dodos or whatever, you go for it. Sorry, I'm a bit giddy. A bit late in the day. I had a nap after lunch. I intended to do this after lunch, but I kind of nodded off. So anyway, I'm reinvigorated. So yeah, so I'm going to do a tiger for Fred and a bear for Stella, and I'm going to be inspired by Kantha. I'm not going to do actual authentic Kantha, you know, I'm just going to be inspired by it. So here's my drawings, don't laugh. They're very basic outlines. If you're not even happy about doing such rubbish drawings as I've done, you can look things up online. If you don't have access to a printer, by the way, if you get an image up, if you've got a tablet or a laptop or a computer screen, if you get an image up on the screen to the actual size that you want, and if it's a touch screen, I believe if you go into your settings you can lock your screen. Then if you take a very soft pencil, very soft so you don't damage your screen, and put very thin copier paper or even tracing paper over, you can trace directly off your screen and then it acts as a light box. That's a tip that someone gave me. But I sort of drew these, I copied, you know, various things and just modified them, because I wanted a bear that looked kind of, have I got them in the right place? You know me. I've got a bear, I wanted a bear that kind of looked a bit realistic. I didn't want it to be a cartoony type bear. and I wanted it to look quite gentle. So I hope I've achieved that. I'm hoping when I've done the eye sort of filled in on the actual thing, it will look a bit less scary. And I was quite pleased with the cat tiger cat. I mean, the stripes obviously straight away make it look like a cat, but I've gone kind of folk arty, so I looked at a lot of pictures online. If you Google traditional Kantha embroidery or Nakshi Kantha, which is figurative Kantha rather than just the running stitch that is often associated with Kantha, Nakshi, Nakshi, you'll find images of actual Kantha quilts, you know, if you want it to look more authentic. But so that's my Fred Tiger mashup, and that's my Stella Bear. So I've drawn them to the size I want. This is just regular copy of paper from the printer, and I've gone over them in a black felt tip pen. I don't need to show you a felt tip pen, you know what they look like, so that it's as clear as possible, and I've tried to keep the lines as simple as possible. And then what I've done is I've chosen my cloth. I'll just put the book, this is by Ektakol, did I say that, in case you don't know and you wanted to look it up. It's a wonderful book. In fact, I'll just show you quickly one or two pictures if I can find. See here, there's elephants on this. Can you see? I'm showing you something if you've gone back to your knitting or your sewing already. See, there's elephants. This poor elephant's got a tiger on his back. But you see, this tiger here has got quite a human face. I'm going to stand up so. Can you see that? Got quite a human face. Excuse my dirty fingernails, I've been fiddling about with my plants. And the elephant's obviously very traditional in Indian embroideries. That's not, I'm looking specifically for animals really. That's geometric, I'm not going to find them there. Fish, there's a fish done in the jali stitch, which is one of the stitches that we looked at. You see the fish? And some you see are quite open, you know, some stitching but a lot of background, sort of more or less just outlined. And then others you will see, she said, trying to find one, like here. This is actually a bovine, a cow goddess. So it's in cow, you can't see all of it, but it's a cow shape with a human face. But you see it's completely filled in. With the filled pattern darning stitch, which I may or may not do, but I think I looked at it last year in the previous Kantha videos. So you can either go for this very dense embroidered look, or that more open, which I've lost now, but the one I showed you before, which is a fish that was more open. But you know, have a look if you've got this book. Obviously I know some of you did get it. Have another flick through it. There's the fish again, there's some birds. You know, and I don't know if they're intended to be any particular species. They're often peacocks. But you can just do a bird. It doesn't have to be identifiable by an ornithologist as a particular species of bird. There's some, I mean, they're people, but they've got, it's called chevron filling stitch, so it's not chevron, sorry. My words are still in my sleep. Well, it says it's backstitch, but it's done in a checkerboard. Let's go with that. That's obviously more, so you know, this is done only with running stitch. So like I said, if you don't want to do the fancy stitches, if you never want to see the mala stitch again, for example, those of you that were here last year and remember that, you can, here's another one, look, you can just do running stitch in different colours and it will be beautiful. See, here's an elephant done quite solidly with the pattern darning, and then the birds are more open and more indistinct, and then the horse I think is lines of chain stitch. It's hard to see, it's a bit grainy. It might be jali stitch. Anyway, but you get the idea. So this are very solid, these more open, these very open. So, you know, you can have a little, spend the week. I mean, you can, I'm going to do some stitching obviously, but you can have a look and see what kind of look you want. Maybe you want to think about the style of your own comfort coverlet as it's developing. I'm not bothered, I'm eclectic, I just do what I do and stick it in, and you know, it all goes together, or it doesn't, and I don't really mind. Well, it always seems to go together, and you can always stitch, you know, over, like I'm going to talk about a week on Friday, to tie things together and so on. like just what look you're going for. I just wanted to show you where my background cloth came from. This was an old tray cloth that I got in France in a job lot of old linen, and it was really rust spotted, as you can see, or age spotted, and it's lovely fine linen. It's quite slubby. I don't think it was very high quality linen. You see the little slubs. It was back in the day it was just linen, but it was monogrammed. I'm rubbish at reading monograms. Can anybody read? Is anybody fluent in monogram? It's definitely the right size. Never work out what they're supposed to be. Is that EL? I don't know. Anyway, so I've torn some off it. Now, two things. One thing is, if you're going to use whatever cloth you use, always, you know what I'm going to say, audition it with the needle that you like to do your embroidery with, especially if you're going to do a lot of surface stitching, as we do. This is like butter, as they say. See? And you can even, if you want to be super sure, get some of your backing cloth, and this is my old sheet that I've been using, and the cloth you're going to stitch on, and audition double to make sure it's nice. That's how I audition. You can, if you want, take the needle right through and make sure the eye goes through, but I know that if it does that and it doesn't leave a sizable hole and there's no resistance, that's something I'm going to enjoy spending time with. If it's not something I'm going to enjoy spending time with, then I'm not using it. Simple as that. So that's my, I just wanted to show you so a lot of people would have walked past that, but now I've got these two pieces out. This age spotting, I've laundered it. It was, I think I'd washed it when I bought it, but it still smelt a bit musty. So I laundered it this morning and hung it on the line. And now it smells lovely. And I ironed it because it's linen, so it needed it. But this now just adds to the feeling of authentic Kantha for me, so that's why I went with that. If this kind of thing you don't like and you want it all new, then you go for it, but that's why I've chosen this. Just wanted to explain where this came from. Okay, so the second thing that's important is when you've done your drawing and you've got the cloth that you think you want to use, before you go cutting your cloth up or tearing it up, take it to a window, put the cloth over your drawing and just check you can see through. Now my cloth is quite thick linen, like I said, but I could just in a sunny window see through well enough to trace. So, and the final thing to think about is what direction do you want your animals to be going in. Now I'm putting them on the right hand side of my coverlet and I wanted them to be facing in, so I've got them going left. Does that make sense? Now if you find an image and it's going the wrong way, what you can do is go over it print it out and go over it in a black pen and then turn it over to the back, put it against a window and draw over it from the other side, and then you've reversed it. If you've got fancy tech skills and you can, manipulate it in your computer, you go for it, but I'm very old school, so you can do flip with the click of a button, I'm sure. So you need your drawing. I'm doing two. You can just do one if you want, or you can do, as many as you want. You can do a whole pack of animals or a herd. So you need your drawings at the actual size in a black pen, and you need your background cloth, and I'll talk about the sizes I've got in a minute, making sure that you can see through it. Now my size of cloth, I mentioned that I want my two finished animals to be a 10-inch square, finished once they're stitched into the coverlet at about 10 inches. Now I'm not that worried about precision because I'm going to put next month's panel in between them. So when I've finished these and stitched them, I can then see if they've shrunk considerably. I can make my centre panel a bit bigger. Do you see what I mean? So if you're doing what I'm doing, don't over stress about the size, just get them somewhere in the region of, and then next month your middle panel can grow or shrink accordingly. But to aim for a 10-inch square, finished with the seams taken out, I've got a 12-inch square of cloth. So I've got it a full inch bigger all the way around, and that is ½ an inch for a seam and ½ an inch to allow for it to shrink if I stitch it heavily. I can always trim it back, and because I know I might want to trim it back, I've made sure my animal is well in the middle. You know, it's not right near the edge, so it's not going to get taken up in the seam or disappear off the edge if I trim it back, if size was important. So just to recap, I want a 10-inch finished square, so I've got a 12-inch square of my surface cloth. And then for my background cloth, I've gone an inch bigger again all around. So this is 14 inches square. Okay, which that's certainly too much, and I'll trim some off, but it's old sheet, I don't mind trimming some off, you know. So I want a 10-inch square, so I've got a 12-inch background piece, just one plain piece of cloth, and a 14-inch backing piece, and I've got that twice, one for Stells and one for Fred. And I've traced them on already, and I've just traced the outlines. And I'm going to insert a little bit of handheld video of me up against my bedroom window, but basically what I do is I stuck this to the window with masking tape, a sunny window, a smooth window obviously, doesn't have to be clean, mine aren't clean enough to see through, so I stuck this with masking tape, and then I stuck the piece of cloth over the top, centralising it. I did Fred quite good and central. Stells is a bit low down, but you know, it'll be fine. Centralising it where you want it on your cloth, and then I taped the cloth to the window, and then I drew with a soft pencil. Now I couldn't show you the actual drawing because I couldn't do it one-handed, but this is a 4B pencil, just a cheap one, but a soft pencil, and when you draw, you can't draw like this on cloth. You have to make this kind of movement, little gentle movements like that. And I find with a regular pencil, these lines I'm going to stitch over anyway, but if you do it lightly, just lightly enough that you can see, it wears off as you work on it. It sort of just lasts long enough for me to finish, and then it's gone. If you don't like that idea, and you've got one of those fancy marking pens, you know, the blue ones that go with water, or the heat ones that go with heat or whatever, and you prefer to use those, you go for it. If you have other ways that you usually transfer to cloth, you know, tailor's carbon paper or printing or any fancy things, then you go for that as well, but this is how I do it, very basic, a pencil, some masking tape and a sunny window. Okay, so I'll insert the bit of video now just so it's clear what I'm saying. Okay, I hope you can see. I'm against my bedroom window, which has got the sun outside at the moment. I've taped my drawing to the window with a bit of masking tape, and then I've taped my bit of linen over the top, also with masking tape, and as you can see I can just see through, and I'm going to trace around the outline. I don't think I'll trace the details. I think I'll just put that in either freehand afterwards or just do it with the stitching. So I'm just going to trace around the outline with a normal soft HB pencil. I've got one here, you won't be able to see it. It's a 4B, a very soft pencil. Anyway, I hope that's helpful if I haven't described it properly for you to actually see it. Okay, so I hope that helped. Oh, sorry, I'll just get my chair back in. I hope that helped. So those are my two designs on my cloth. And I have basted one of them, can't remember which was Stells. So I've basted Stella the bear. So using the invisible baste, I've basted this down, and I did it at my desk because this linen is quite shifty. And I basted lines about 3 inches apart, just going like that. I hope you can see how I did it, as smooth as I can, but with this kind of stitching, you know, heavy stitching, any little puckers will all disappear into the intentional puckering that we're going to put in it. So I basted that one on already. I don't think I need to show you the invisible baste, but I thought maybe there are new people here. There have been some new people lately, which is lovely. If you're new here, welcome, welcome. You're very welcome. And I'm sure I say that speak for all of us. So let's just smooth it down so it's roughly central. I've got my little applique pins, and I know I'm not doing applique, but I nearly always use these. And you see how easy that went through my cloths. Traditional Kantha was often made from old saris. These days they do make Kantha with new cloth, particularly when they're creating for tourists and so on, and you know, if they have access to new cloth. But Traditionally it was made using old saris, and even the threads would have been pulled from the sides of the saris and used to stitch. And often, because the saris were quite worn, and was commonly cotton muslin saris, it wasn't necessarily silk. We kind of think of sari silk these days, but it would have been also cotton muslin saris. Yeah, because they were often quite worn, they would put several layers together. I've just got 2 here. I nearly always stitch 2 layers just because that flies back. Just because it's nice to stitch through. One thing is I don't use a hoop. I just don't like to use a hoop. I don't like the action of stitching with a hoop, and I don't like holding a hoop. That's just my personal preference. I'm not saying it's wrong. So if you've got 2 layers of cloth, it makes it a bit sturdier. Stitching through 1 layer of cloth, it's really difficult to control the tension. So using a second layer kind of negates the need for a hoop to a degree. You still have to be careful of your tension, but I like to play with the tension, so I like the freedom to do that. But in this sense, stitching with 2 layers is kind of a nod to traditional Kantha, where they would have layered the cloths together because they were worn. So they would put the most worn out cloth in the middle, almost like a wadding or a batting, and then, you know, put the best cloth on the outside. You do see people using wadding or batting with Kantha. It's not traditional, and I personally don't like to use wadding. Number 1, because I would have to buy it and I don't want to do that, and number 2, because I don't like it that thick, even the fine waddings, because I prefer the stitch definition from thinner layers. But again, you know, that's just personal taste. You can experiment with that, absolutely. So for the invisible base, I don't know how much you're going to see, because obviously I want to use cream on cream. But I'll just do 2 or 3 stitches. I'm leaving a border unstitched of about 1 inch around the edge of my piece. I can go between the layers with my knot if I'm bothered, and come up on the surface and pull it right through, because I didn't put a knot in. Sorry. There's not even really any need to do a knot if you're careful, but it's just my habit. So come through just the top layer, and then you take a teeny tiny back stitch on the front of the cloth, and with this linen I can take just 1 thread of the linen, and then you take a bigger stitch forward on the back. So I've got 1 thread of my cloth on the front, and then maybe ½ an inch on the back. And I'm doing it flat on a table like this. I usually stitch on my knee, but you know, for videos obviously I do it on the table. Doing it flat on the table like this means when you're basting, especially if it's a slightly larger piece, you can keep it flatter. So I'm not going to do the whole thing with you, because I think you get the idea. So it's, and I just love doing it. I know many of you have learned to love it if you didn't know it already before you came here. It's just got a lovely rhythm to it. And what that means is once you're done, I'll just park the needle in there. Once you've basted like this piece, now I've got no pins in it to worry about. It's all held together, it's not going to move. It's all nice and flat and smooth, and I can just get on with my fancy stitching and not worry. So, what am I going to do with my off-centre bear? I think I'm going to start just by outlining her. She's obviously a she-bear because she represents Stella. So I've got some brown embroidery floss, and I did have a little think about what stitch I might want to use. My elephant rice bags I use chain stitch mostly, but I think for this I'm going to do a split back stitch, so with 2 strands of floss, and it's kind of a little bit a similar principle to the Algerian stars that we did last week, that modification in the middle with the extra colour. So I'm going to come up somewhere. I'm not going to bother hiding my knot. Oh, before I forget, I was going to show you the back of my coverlet, and I forgot. Excuse me. Sorry, this is an all over the place kind of video this week. I won't be a sec. I just wanted to show you the back. I won't take you out and do your handheld. I'll move the quilt around underneath. Because there's a lot of discussion every now and then about the back. I like backs like this. I probably won't cover mine. I will show you how to at the end of the year, like I've said a few times. But I wouldn't say I prefer the back to the front, but I like it as much but in a different way. And here's the back of where I did my stars and my convent stitch in the middle of there. So yeah, I'm just showing you the back. Okay, so back to this and the split back stitch. There are a few different ways of doing it. Ecta Call in her book describes 2 ways, neither of which are the way that I do it. So I'm going to show you the way I do it. So I'm going to come up on my drawn line, just somewhere, doesn't matter because I'm going to go all the way around. And then I'm going to make, I did say I've got 2 strands of floss, didn't I? And then I'm going to make a normal forward stitch, the length of stitch that I want, and then come out again a stitch length away. I don't worry too much about consistency and stitch length, you'll get a rhythm as you stitch. So I've just made a normal running stitch with my Lazy Girl thread, and then I go back in about halfway along the previous stitch and try to get between those 2 strands, but without stressing too much about it. And then I come forward kind of half a stitch length, because every time as we move forward we're going to come back halfway into the previous stitch. I hope that is clear. And then forward half a stitch length, and whatever rhythm suits you. And you get this line, you get a solid line, but because you're splitting the thread, it's probably quite hard to see on the camera, it looks like a very tiny chain stitch, and I just love the line it makes. And it is a traditional Kantha stitch that you see used as an outlining stitch. And so basically I'm just going to do that all the way around the edge of Stella Bear, just to outline her, and I don't know what I'm going to do to the rest of her yet. If you remember my drawing, you'll see that I've marked sections on her, because I did think about, you often see that done and then it's filled in with stitches going in different directions. I might do something like that, but I'm not there yet, so I'll see when I get there. Probably this week this will be, you know, enough, because you have to give it some thought and do some research and so forth. So I'm just going to outline and just enjoy stitching this and not having to piece. I like piecing. I know many of you didn't like piecing last month, although many of you gave it a go. And you all found another way to deal with it if you really didn't want to do the piecing, so, you know, that was wonderful. But I just thought, and I do try to make sure the months are kind of mixed up with regard to technique, so that you're not doing piecing month after month and then embroidery month after month, you know. So, but I do want to use all these different techniques because I think it makes the cloth more interesting. I think it's good for you, certainly if you're a newbie, a relative newbie to stitching, because you get a chance to try all these different things. And for me, I like, you know, that is my work. And I do want to share with you my authentic self and not doing things just for the sake of it, you know. So you just have to pay a little bit of attention when you put your needle in. Ecta Call does this way, but she comes up from the back, and I find that really hard to know where to go to split the stitch. You know, she comes up from the back through the stitch. So that's why I've always done it this way, because then you can see where you're going in. And you can even, if you're on a slightly straighter line, do your stitches slightly bigger, and then if you come to a tighter curve, you can just do them slightly smaller so that they go more easily around the curve. I'm using, did I say I was using, well, you can see I'm using brown. I don't know whether I will stick to browns for the bear when I come to it. Stella is brown, as most of you know. But you don't have to be realistic. She's not a bear. I'm just enjoying the simplicity of that line of stitching against this lovely old linen. Okay, I've finished outlining my Stella Bear, and I was using some brown out of my Tangly Orts nest, and I actually ran out just on her back foot here, so I had to use a slightly different shade of brown and I think in the scheme of things it's not going to show, but what I should have done, because I only had one length of the 6 strands and I was using 2 strands, you know, each time, is what I then learned, which I know, but I didn't think of it. I thought there'd be enough, but it does take quite a lot of thread, this split back stitch, this split stitch. So when I came to do I've nearly finished the outlining on Fred, I had 2 lengths. This is just if you are using, you know, leftover bits and you're worried you might not have enough. I had 2 lengths of, that's not it, where's it gone? 2 lengths which I've now lost, there it is, it's gone under there, of 2 different shades of dark grey, both 6-stranded. So what I did was I took 1 strand of each and used them together. So that was one shade of grey and that was the other shade of grey, and that only had 5 strands in actually, that bit. But anyway, so I took a strand of each and used them together, so then it's consistent. That's just a tip in case you hadn't thought of it, like I hadn't until I learned my lesson. So I'm just going to finish the split back stitch, the split stitch on the little back of Fred here. So going back into the stitch and then forward half a stitch, thereabouts. And I have here and there, when I've gone round tight curves like here, made the stitches smaller and like round the end of the tail and round the feet. Like I said, then you get a neater curve than if you do a longer stitch, you know, and then you might get a jagged, just if that matters to you, it's just a tip. And thinking about things like that when you're stitching, of course, is for me part of the mindfulness of the process as well. Just paying attention to what you're doing and responding to what's necessary rather than having the idea in your mind that you must keep your stitches consistent. That's not necessarily the case when you're doing things like this. So I'm just coming up to the end, which is where I left the end to show you. So I'm going to come about halfway that space that's left and then go back into the previous stitches before, and then I'm going to come forward just into the first stitch that I did. So I'm coming up just between the strands, just a little way in, and then I'll go back down through the previous stitch, and that will make it look kind of cohesive rather than just going straight down into the hole where you started from. You see, it just looks more that you can't see the beginning or the end. No, don't bark, Stell, she can hear people outside. So I'm just going to finish off with a little back stitch, and then I'm just going to tuck my tail in under and trim it off, and I'll show you the line it makes on the back as well. I've obviously got my tails because I just did a knot and tails, but as I said earlier and as I showed you, I don't mind, in fact I quite like a messy back. So apart from my little tails where I stopped and started, you get a similar effect on the back. There for some reason I didn't go right through, but you know, the back is reasonably neat, and if you'd hidden your knots and not left tails, it would be reversible in effect. So if that kind of thing's important to you, you know. And the back of Stella, just to show you, is the same thing. It's a reasonably neat line on the back. So the next thing I think I want to do is these eyes, their eyes, because I do it often if I'm sketching or painting a face as well, put the eye in fairly early on, because then it's looking at you, it gives it its character and helps you to engage with it more. That's my thinking. So for Fred's eye, I've got just 1 strand of black in my needle, and these are those lovely fine needles that Jennifer sent me. Jenny? I think she goes by Jenny. She sent me these. I haven't got the packet, I've put it in with my journal stuff, I think. Did she send me a packet? No, I think she sent me them in these. But these were, she's in the States, but these were a brand of needle and I can't remember the name. Anyway, they're lovely. They're vintage needles, but they're so fine and sharp. So I use them either for piecing or if I'm just doing a single strand of floss. Put the circle template back in there. Also in there, if
if you remember last year when we made the mandala as part of the weekly project, are still the little bits of my mandala that I didn't use, and they're in there. They're just a little memory. I left them in there because I, didn't put them away in the scraps, but I just like to see them in there, so I just leave them in there, under there. There we go. Okay, so I've got my one strand with a little knot in, but the knot might well pull through this fine cloth. So I am going to put my finger where his eye is, and I'll, on the back, do a little back stitch first, just through the backing cloth, just so it doesn't pull through. There's people having a chat outside. And I'm just going to outline his eye with probably just a normal back stitch, because I can't really split a single strand of floss easily. So quite tiny stitches, a running stitch to start, and then back into the whole of the previous stitch. Just, just a normal little back stitch, just as an outline. Come right down into the corner, and now I'm going to come up into the corner. You could jump across and then just carry on back stitching, but I like to come up into the corner again and turn it and then just do the other side of his eye. Probably just gauging the space, although it will kind of read as a continuous line more or less, so it doesn't really matter. One more stitch, come up in exactly the same hole if possible, and then go back down. Just push it all into place with my thumb if it's not how I want it, to make it behave. And then I'll just finish off on the back. So with 2 back stitches, and weave it through and trim it off. And then, so that's his little cat-shaped eye, or ellipse-shaped eye. He already looks better, but it needs more. I shall come back to that. While I've got this needle in my hand, I'll do Stella's eye, which is round. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm just going to do a little outline to start with. And because this is round and small, I'm going to do very tiny stitches just to get around that curve. Very tiny stitches, maybe 1/8 of an inch long. Just over my pencil line. This feels so lovely and soft, this cloth. Okay, so I got right round again. Just make the last stitch. And that's not too bad. That'll do, pig, that'll do, bear. Little dog on the park called Bear, and he does look like a little woolly bear. That's his name, Bear. Right. So now let's go back to Fred. Because I want him to have a cat's eye, or the shape of cat's eyes. I've got 2 strands of gold here, and I'm going to do a little granitos stitch for his pupil in the gold. So I'm going to come up about halfway along, just inside my black line that I just made, and then I want to lay my thread across his eye and to the opposite side, just inside the black line, and then I want to come back up the first side in the same hole that the thread's coming out of. That's my first stitch. And now I want to lay my thread to the left of that stitch, my left, and go back down into the same hole again on the opposite side of his eye, and then come back up in the same hole. I'm working the same hole every time, and as I pull through with my thumbnail, I'm just going to guide that thread so that it stays on the left of that first stitch. And then for the third and final stitch, I want the thread to lay on the right of those two stitches. So I'm going to go back in the same hole again to the back, and then pull it through from underneath, and as I pull through I'm going to put my thumbnail over those stitches that are already there, and then pull through so that that stitch that I'm making now stays on the right hand side. And that makes this little granitos stitch. Granitos is little grain. And it looks kind of like a little grain of rice. That's what I guess where the name comes from, or a little grain of something, little grain of truth. But it makes, I think, quite a good cat's eye shape. So he's now got an eye. I think I might actually now go back again with my black, which I've obviously finished off, but that doesn't matter. There's a tiny bit of black left in my needle. Just do two back stitches on the back and just weave it through. Snip that off, and then I'm going to go back to my single strand of black, like I said. Is there enough? Yeah, there's plenty. I'll do a knot again. And this is a lot of fiddle just for a little eye, but sometimes it's nice to just fiddle about. I mean, the eyes are so important on any, anything with a face. The eyes are what we're drawn to. I'm going to do a back stitch again so that it doesn't pull through. And I'm just going to make a stitch either side of that granitos stitch. And I'm going to endeavour to curve it. So I'm going to come up through more or less the same hole where all those gold stitches are coming, when I can find it. I'll try and keep my hand out of your way, and then try and lay that one to the left of it and go in again the same hole where all the gold stitches are coming out of. And then as I pull it through, I'll just keep my thumb there just to make sure it lays where I want it to. And then I'm going to come up again on the opposite side in the same hole. And you've guessed it, I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other side. So I'll go back through the same hole here, and then as I pull through, I can get my hand underneath. As I pull through with my thumbnail again, I'll make sure that black thread lays on the other side, and that's straight away better. I think that just frames that little bit of gold and just makes it look more of a ellipse shape. And I think that is fine. I don't need to do anything else, I don't think. I'll leave it for now. Maybe later I'll come back and add some more to it. I mean, if you really wanted to get fanciful, you could do eyelashes, or just another little line underneath or something. But I think I'm just going to leave it like that for now and see how he relates to me. I'm quite pleased with it. It's folk arty. It might be more realistic if it was more that way, but no, I'm happy with it. I'm happy with it. It looks authentic to me. So I'm just going to finish off that bit of thread. And go back to Stella's eye. Now, I haven't studied bears' eyes up close in image form or in real life, but it doesn't matter because I don't need to be realistic. But I don't think there's really a visible pupil, not a pupil, the visible white of the eye. So I think for Stella's eye, I'm going to make the entire eye dark and then see how it looks and see where I go from there. I haven't really got enough black here, but I have got those dark greys that I use for Fred. So I think I used those. Okay, so I've got that 2 strands of that grey. Tie a knot. Gardener's fingers. I've been putting hand cream on, but still my hands are quite dry. Okay, and I think I'm going to just do like a satin stitch. So I'm going to start in the middle and work one way and the other way, I think. I guess you could do it in any direction. I kind of feel I want to do it diagonally. So the first stitch straight across, just inside that black line, and then come up just next to it on the opposite side. If you can't get it close enough with your first pass, you can always go back and fill in. And lay that where I want it. Just staying inside that black line. And as you pull it through, just make sure it lays where you want. Push it with your thumb, give it a smush. Probably squeeze one more in there, and then I'll go up and do the other side in the same way. It is, like I said, I do think it is worth, with eyes, taking a bit of time, because it is what you're drawn to. If you're not sure with your own creature, with your own animal that you pick, or whatever you pick, you can always practice just doing eyes on a separate little scrap. Until you're happy with the effect. I might just squeeze one more in there. But now it seems to me that she's got a personality, and Fred's got a personality. I mean, these representations of them, obviously the real things have got personalities in abundance. I think that's enough. Now I wasn't sure before I started whether I wanted to do a little highlight in the eye. Like when one is painting, when people are painting, or sketching, you do the pupil and then you put a little highlight to show the direction the light's coming from, just a little white dot, and it just brings the eye to life. I was just wondering if I wanted to do that with a stitch, because I do quite like it. I think I'm going to try it. I'm going to just be brave. I've got some white thread here. I've got very thin white thread. This is from the mending thread that I used in the borrow piece last Friday. Threads in all my needles now. I have that one back, put that bit of black back in there. So there's a lot of different colours, a lot of thread in your needles, and messing about just for two tiny areas, but I do think it's worth it. I keep saying that. I don't know why I keep saying it. I suppose because it's maybe not very slow stitchy to fiddle about and be precise. But anyway, so I need to think about where I'm going to put it. I don't want to put it centre. If you put it completely dead centre, she'll look a bit like a googly eye. I think I might put it slightly up to the top and to one side. Just one tiny is going to be virtually invisible, and if I do it and it's not enough, I can always go over with another stitch. I think I will. It's very tiny. I think I'm just going to go over it again, slightly bigger. I wouldn't want to do anything super big like a French knot or something. Pull that through and have a look again. Yeah, I think that's good. No, one more. Just one more tiny weeny stitch. And this is now, to me, slow stitching, within the slow, because you're looking, you're paying attention, you're responding to how it looks and what it needs. So just a third teeny tiny little stitch. And now I think that's enough. Yeah, that just brings that eye a little bit to life for me. I'll hold it up, hopefully in the right place so you can see. It's just a tiny dot of white. So I'll finish that off on the back, and I think for this week that's enough. It doesn't seem like we've done very much, but actually we've done quite a lot, because we did quite a lot before we even got to the cloth. You know, you need to decide what animal or animals you want to represent. You need to find an image or draw an image, choose your cloth, get it onto your cloth, baste your cloths together, all that kind of thing. And then, you know, maybe just stitch your outlines. Oh, the other thing I did want to talk about is here and there, it's foofy and poofy, especially here on Fred between under his belly. You see how that's sticking up? That's because I probably pulled those stitches slightly too tight around there, and they've enclosed this unstitched area. I'm not remotely worried about that, because 1, 2, 3 all together now. That will be sorted out with more stitching. Okay, so here's Fred the tiger and Stella Bear, and I'll just remind you of my images here. So I'm going to next week come back and look at how I might put some of the detail into each of them, but I think that's enough for you to be going on with for now. The other thing is, I know some of you move on and start doing all kinds of other stuff, and I've seen here and there some of you say, oh no, I did all other stuff, and then Catherine did something and I couldn't do it anymore because I'd filled in the space with other stuff. Just a heads up, I may or may not, I don't know yet, do some kind of motify stuff to make a border. I'm not sure, but I may or may not make a border around them. So if you want to start, you know, doing more stitching in the background, just be aware that I may or may not do a border if that's something that you would like. I don't know yet, because I'm you know, making it up as I go along as usual. So I hope you like that. I hope you like this month's theme. I look forward to hearing. You'll have to let me know what animals you've chosen, animal or animals, and why, if you're happy to share that, because I'd love to know. I love reading your stories in the comments about how and why you interpret the things that I do. So have a lovely week stitching, and thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to you joining me next time for more Cloth Tales. Bye bye.